In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, welcome to a very special episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. I'm Andrew Langer.
I'm Jerry Rogers.
And this is episode 10. We're going to change the verbiage a little bit in light of the seriousness of the situation. This is episode 10. Andrew and Jerry stand up for Ukraine. And so we welcome you to this. It has been a crazy couple of days here. In fact, Jerry, without any real introductions, why don't we, should we just go straight to our Rip from the Headlines segment?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So let's go right now to Ripped from the Headlines.
Ripped from the Headlines.
Yeah. So, it's funny. We're going to be joined, by the way, in a little bit by Tony Shaffer from the London Center for Public Policy. We had Tony on in January. Tony's going to be our first return guest. But way back when in January, Tony had said that the invasion of Ukraine could come any day now.
In weeks, he said, yeah, that's right.
I think, it's funny, up to even Tuesday night, there was some speculation as to whether or not Vladimir Putin was going to pull the trigger. Last weekend, Jerry, I was looking at weather reports and looking at we thought that he was going to try to wait for a hard frost or a freeze because it would make it easier for the tanks. Putin waited for none of this and pulled the trigger and went. You were on the air when this all happened, weren't you?
I was on WBAL and filling in during the 7 to 11 shift. And we had talked about Ukraine earlier in the show. In fact, I had Guy Shepard on. Guy Shepard's been a guest here with us. And I also had our friend Brian Darling on. And we did a good hour on Ukraine and what led to it. We were asking questions like why hadn't the Biden administration implement sanctions prior to the invasion? And then literally, as I'm talking, producer in my ear says, you got to throw to ABC News, Russia has invaded Ukraine.
Yeah. And invaded in a way that I think few really anticipated. We've been talking for months now about Eastern Ukraine. That right on the border with Russia, the Donbass region. I can pull up a map in a second, and I will. But what we didn't, we knew that there were troops that were massing in the Belarus, in Belarus, right, which used to be a Soviet republic, now a sovereign state, but most people recognize it as a vassal state, as well as troops massing and ships massing in the Black Sea, something we talked about with Guy Shepard last week, and troops massing in Crimea. What I don't think we were anticipating was a full-scale invasion into eastern Ukraine from the north, sweeping southward towards Kiev. I want to get to Kiev in a second, and then coming up from the south through Odessa. Jerry, when did we stop calling Kiev Kiev?
I know that's very interesting to me.
We'll ask Tony about this.
No, but it's true. It's in fact, I had to double check a couple of times when I heard reporters. Here's what I think that is. Early on, a lot of the reporting from Ukraine was coming from European reporters.
Yeah.
And I think they say Kiev like a European would say Kiev.
Yes.
And that's how it happened. And then Americans, just being dumb Americans, American media, that is, they just started to mimic the European reporters. This is like how the Weather Channel, the anchors, they always say Appalachia.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's not Apple. It's Appalachia. I mean,
Appalachia. It's
Appalachia,
like
that's right.
Buzz Burbank on the old Don and Mike show used to talk about Hawaii, and used to be very
remember the old Saturday Night Live skit, Nicaragua.
Yes, that's exactly right. Hey Jerry, so I'm pulling this up here. I can put that down.
Actually, Andrew, I'm so happy you said that about Kiev because I've been meaning. You're the resident expert.
Thank you.
On Russia and these sorts of things. And I've been meaning to ask you for about 4 days, Andrew, when I say Kiev, I almost called you last night before the show to ask you if I was pronouncing Kiev wrong.
Yeah, just say it right. Just say Kiev. It's fine.
But it's again, I'm so.
I said to my daughter yesterday, do you ever watch, not that I want to make jokes. We're trying to be very serious today. Though I do have something kind of lighter that I want to end the show with. But did you ever watch Catfish?
No.
Okay. Catfish on NTV. The host is somebody named Neve. And I asked Abby if his name was really Niev. She thought that was funny. So anyway, so this is for those of you who are watching. I'm sorry, for those of you who are listening. I've pulled up the map of Ukraine. No longer called the Ukraine, called Ukraine. This is from Al Jazeera of all places, and this is their live action here. As you can see, so you have Belarus, which is up to the north. And actually fairly west in terms of
northwest
in terms of the Ukrainian sovereign territory. By the way, Jerry, because you can see this on the map. Watch the map down here. Just so my people, the Langers, we're from right down and in here in Romania, northeastern Romania, right on that Ukrainian border and right on the border with Moldova. This area, you know, went back and forth over many years between Russia and Wallachia and Moldavia and anyway, controlled by lots of different people, Austria-Hungary at various points in time. So what we all thought was that that Russia would sort of invade along this axis here through Donetsk.
On the east. For those who are listening, it's he's drawing a line on the east.
Sorry, yes, through Donetsk to the east and Luhansk. In fact, those were territories that were already. These are the territories that were considered that the Vladimir Putin earlier this week, and that's what I want to talk about next. Vladimir Putin earlier this week declared as independent nations, and that really he was going to move to control those. Jerry, that's the really interesting thing, and I'm genuinely shocked that there hasn't been more attention paid to the in the Western press to the disconnect between what Putin said earlier this week, or was it over the weekend, declaring these territories as independent states and thus creating this justification. This is what gives rise, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, to the comments that former President Donald Trump made on that podcast that the left is having so much hay with.
Not just the left. I mean, Rich Lowry, editor at National Review, has a piece that's been up at New York Post for 2-3 days now. And again, it still strikes me how the Never Trumpers, and by the way, I want to say this. I know we're talking geopolitics here and the map is up, but the fact of the matter is that we should thank the Never Trumpers because Biden has them to thank for his presidency.
Yeah, Biden should thank the Never Trumpers. We should be thanking.
I'm being sarcastic, facetious.
Yes.
But the bottom line is that this is a self-inflicted crisis. No way did this have to happen, but for the Joe Biden presidency, but for the progressives, the Democratic parties making climate change a fetish. Going back, I said this to Andrew off mic. In 2000, in the 2000s, when Barack Obama was president, Barack Obama decided that the 60-year, 70-year strategy, Pentagon strategy of America's military being able to fight on two fronts, Obama decided that this was bad for the environment, that the armed forces carbon footprint was too big, and therefore he changed again 50, 60, 70 years of U.S. policy since World War II, and made and gutted the military. Well, and then of course what happened in 2014, Putin invaded Crimea.
Yes, and
my point is this though.
Well, Crimea and Eastern Ukraine, Jerry.
Right. It's the fetish. It's the left's fetish of climate change.
Well, and that is certainly a part of it, and it gets about where we are now in terms of what's happened here. Certainly, and we'll get into this with Tony Shaffer. The measurement of U.S. resolve, and what I don't mean is resolve like standing up to Putin right now, but I mean the measurement of how the U.S. forces might conduct themselves or how strong the U.S. forces might be, given all of the political engineering and the societal engineering that has been occurring in the military, I'm sure Putin looks at them and laughs.
Well, again, let's spell that out for clarity.
Yeah.
Over under the Obama administration, and certainly over the past year under the Biden administration, our troops, our armed services are taking sensitivity training.
Yeah.
We are building transgendered bathrooms. We are implementing critical race theory classes for our troops. Meanwhile, the Russians are training to defend itself and to conquer its neighbors.
It is interesting because I want to get into this as I'm looking at this map. So I want to get back to this before we get Tony on, as we're sort of setting this thing up. So the Russians didn't just attack along this eastern border, and I'm pointing once again to the map, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, if you're listening right now, you ought to go ahead and pull up any map of Ukraine that shows what the troop movements are, because I think that'll be helpful. What is really interesting is that they are pushing southward from Belarus towards Kiev. And one of the things that separates Belarus from Kiev is the site of the former Chernobyl plant,
right.
Nuclear power plant.
Also, a big airfield is there as well.
Well, yes, of course. But the point is that and Chernobyl and the Chernobyl area, not heavily guarded, restricted. But you can go online and watch videos of people sneaking into the Chernobyl site. It's very easy to do. But the point is that it created this corridor. Weirdly enough, in the same way that calls for creating wilderness areas, like federally designated wilderness areas along the U.S. southern border, has the impact of weakening our borders. This is certainly a weak spot in the Ukrainian sovereign territory.
A point here,
yeah.
Andrew's point here is that the Russians came in from, I think, three vectors, right?
Three vectors. They couldn't
from
come
the
in
northwest.
They couldn't come in from the
right.
north, south, and
now,
east.
But what surprises me is that people are surprised that troops came in from Belarus because there were 60,000 Russian troops in Belarus.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what? I mean,
and this. I'm sorry,
Jay, why does this surprise you?
But this gets to the point that. And it gets to where I'm surprised the press isn't making more hay of this, and the U.S. government and NATO isn't making more hay of this.
Well, because the press is too busy covering up for Biden, and
well, that's true.
And NATO is
you're missing what I'm saying. They're covering up for. In this idea, Putin himself laid out his justification. Right, he said, "We're just going in." And we're going to be engaging in peacekeeping operations in these republics. That he went and launched a wholesale invasion of the entire sovereign state of Ukraine, has sort of that original justification has been sort of lost in the narrative here. And I would think that at the very least somebody would have been asking the question, hey, what happened to peacekeeping operations in the Donbass, Mr. Putin? This is certainly more involved than that. But this is interesting.
As we're talking, Andrew, I'm sorry. As we're talking, I'm watching live images from Kiev, and you have families, and I'm struck by this. You have moms and dads and children trying to escape from Kiev. And again, we can talk geopolitics and peacekeeping justifications in these Russian, ethnic Russian areas in eastern Ukraine, but the bottom line is that there are families torn apart. There are fathers saying goodbye to their children, maybe for the last time. The people have fought back and have dug in, and what are we doing here? We have the Never Trumpers still blaming Trump for this. We have people arguing over face masks and COVID protocols. We're having a conversation later today about a Supreme Court justice nomination. And in the meantime, fathers are literally saying goodbye to their daughters. And all of this didn't have to happen but for Joe Biden. Well, that's my message today, that Joe Biden, the president of the United States, and his progressive base facilitated the havoc and the destruction and the heartache happening in Ukraine right now.
Let me sort of pivot off of that for a second, Jerry, and I want to talk about something you and I talked about over the last couple of days, which was my realization that the last 3 days have been the culmination of Vladimir Putin's entire career as a counterintelligence officer. That Vladimir Putin, when he was a KGB officer, was tasked with working to unravel the fabric of the West, to use the West's classical liberal institutions as weapons against themselves, to take advantage of that, and to essentially turn Americans against one another and Westerners against each other in a very real way, to the point where the West's cohesion and the principles upon which the West could, Western nations and Western people could adhere to one another, those are no longer there, and thus giving him I'm not going to say a vehicle. Vehicle is probably not the right word, but a way of easing, a lubricant.
Yeah,
I would use the phrase a lubricant to ease his way into Ukraine. And yes, I know that's a very vivid image.
You're right, but let me just add this to what you're saying, because you're 100% correct in terms of his expertise, his career, his mindset in terms of turning the West against itself. But let's back up even, right? 1988, 1989. Vladimir Putin is the head of the KGB office in Berlin.
Yes.
East Berlin.
Yeah.
And the wall comes down.
Yeah.
And you have Germans, East Germans, mob attacking the Stasi headquarters.
Yeah.
The East German secret police headquarters. And they made their way, the mob made its way to the KGB headquarters. And a young Vladimir Putin was in charge. True story.
Yep.
And he decided, we're going to stand our ground.
Yeah.
And he warned the mob. He said, we'll fire on you. We will kill you.
Yeah.
And the mob dispersed. The mob left the KGB headquarters alone. And then Putin made a phone call to his Russian Soviet counterparts and said, we need cover. We need to be exported out of here, right?
Exfiltration.
And he was told Moscow has gone dark. Now here's my point. That's the day he decided what is happening today. And this is what I mean by this, and how I'm going to tie in what you just said about the West, his strategy of the West turning against itself. So, fast forward through the years, the West again has made climate change the existential threat. And so you have Germany and Western Europe giving up on fossil fuel and moving towards green energy. The problem with that is green energy doesn't exist.
Yes.
It's a fairy tale. It's fantasy. I said this last night. I said that to make a car battery, an electric car battery, it takes 100 barrels of oil to make one car battery that can produce the energy equivalent of 1 barrel of oil. Yeah. And then you still have to plug it in and use coal. I mean, this idea of green energy is just a myth.
Sorry, go ahead. Especially if you're not willing to consider nuclear power as an option.
Exactly right. And so therefore, so Western Europe turned towards this mythical green energy that doesn't exist, and they were forced to do what? To fall back on Russian gas. Yeah. And so now you have Western Europe, Germany in particular, dependent upon Russian energy, and so climate change has forced the West to accept what's happening in terms of Russian policy.
To take it even a step further back and to figure out where this determination, where this drive, who has been supporting these entities in terms of moving towards this idea. Because if you know anything about Putin, or Jerry, you and I have talked about this before, right? The idea of your opponents always telegraph what they're doing by what they accuse you of.
Yes, exactly right.
For Putin, who believes in his heart of hearts that there's no such thing as a spontaneous or organic protest, that there's somebody always behind that protest pulling the strings, that shows you that intelligence and counterintelligence under Vladimir Putin has been all about working its way in the same way, frankly, that the Chinese do. We're also going to talk to Tony Shaffer about this. But this is my point, is that in the end, the chaotic response that we're seeing, the misinformation that is being shown from various sides about the other, the lack of a cohesion amongst these NATO countries, this is going to sound conspiracy theory oriented, and it is. I'm going to admit this, but I think in the end, much in the same way. Anyway, I'm not going to make this comparison, but I think at the end of the day, you're going to find that there's been a tremendous amount of Russian influence and all this. Listen, in the same way that the Russians were running intelligence and counterintelligence operations during the 2016 election as a way of turning people against each other and as a way of fomenting chaos.
Yesterday,
we got to go in a second, Jerry.
I know, but yesterday you had Democrat politicians, Mark Warner from Virginia, Van Hollen from Maryland, and others still saying that Putin was buddies with Trump. Yes. They can't get over their Trump derangement. And we'll talk to Tony about this, but the fact of the matter is that Trump pulled all the right levers for 4 years that kept Putin on his heels. But anyway, I know that we have to go to
let's do that. In fact, let us
leave rip from the headlines and go to Ask the Experts.
Well, let us now go to Jerry. You could say, Jerry, you say it. Let's go to expert advice.
Let's go to expert advice.
Expert advice.
Well, welcome to the expert advice segment on this episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. We're fortunate to bring back a guest. This is the first guest we've brought back on the podcast. His name is Tony Shaffer. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, very well versed in special operations, celebrated author. Did I say his name? Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, president of the London Center. Let's start here. When last we spoke back in January, we thought we were days. What we were waiting. Vladimir Putin was waiting to get all of his ducks in a row, and once he got all of his ducks in a row, then he pulled the trigger, didn't he?
Well, I think, as we've talked about, and I mentioned then, he wasn't going to do anything until after the Olympics. And note that within 48 hours of the Olympics ending, but after last time we spoke, the Biden administration said like 3 times, "Today's the day. Today's the day. Today's." It's like I was going back and forth with a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs on this, and he said he thinks it's bad intelligence, and I said no, it's bad interpretation of intelligence. They had intelligence, it's just they've lost track, Andrew, of how to understand, and I'll just say it, Soviet military communications. One of the things we did during the Cold War is we didn't always understand what the content was, but we understood patterns. Like, okay, if these guys are talking, this is what this means, and I think they've lost that. So they cried wolf several times. Nobody believed them. They finally said he's coming, and nobody believed him because they already said he was coming. He went, and here we are. So I think it's very interesting that we've had so much misinterpretation by the Biden administration on what's going on since we last spoke. So
the irony there, Tony, is that the news media, right? The ABC News. I was on the air 2 nights ago when the invasion happened, and I had to, and I didn't want to. I had to throw to ABC News, and then I had to hear an hour's worth of them promoting the intelligence community and the Joe Biden presidency and how they understood this was happening, and they told us it was unfolding. And I'm sitting there, right on mic, wanting to scream at the reporters. Well, then why didn't he do this? Why didn't they do that? Right. Where were the sanctions? And it's just, why didn't we move more troops into the Balkans? I mean, there's so many questions as why, and yet the news media is still using this as a propaganda to prop up the Biden administration.
Well, and then they didn't even challenge him greatly on his comment that, sanctions were never meant to deter Putin. It's like, what?
Oh my goodness.
What planet do you accept that as a comment from a president?
Yeah.
I mean, I simply don't understand how people can be this cowed into thinking that the White House insane comments are nothing more than propaganda at this point. I just don't. I don't. Well, understand.
You know what? I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm going to jump in again here because and I said in jest is the wrong way to say that, because there's no joking. There's not a joking matter. But if I were a Hollywood producer and someone handed me this script, I would say, no, this story has too many holes in it. It's obvious that the US administration is in cahoots with the Russians. I mean, everything Joe Biden has done over the past year, and frankly, today, we still haven't disrupted the energy exports from Russia. Why not?
Right.
And I understand that the SWIFT banking, the SWIFT banking system, the SWIFT banking system is more than just the
I was about
U.S.
to mention that too.
But if the U.S. wants to, we can get them off the SWIFT banking system. Anyway, I'm sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
But talk about those things in terms of what Jerry's saying, Tony.
Well, Germany, look, on the intelligence piece, I don't know how we missed Steven Seagal being the head of special forces going into the airport at Kiev. I don't know. I mean, man, we should have had eyes on Steven Seagal from day one. The moment he defected, we should have said, man, if something's going to happen, watch Steve Seagal. Yep. And I don't know how we missed that. I mean, I simply don't know. And boy, what a boon to Putin to have gotten. I mean, God bless. I mean, the greatest action hero in the world defects to Russia. How did we not see this coming?
Yes.
Anyway, all kidding aside, I know it's going to get me in trouble. Anyway, the whole principle of intel has to be based on disapproving your own, what we call confirmation bias. What I've seen over and over and over, and I advise multiple people, senior intelligence officers, generals, like, dude, don't be wishful thinking yourself into a situation where you misinterpret things because you want something to be a certain way. And this is what I've seen over and over within our intelligence community, even to this day. And even the Trump folks did it to a certain extent. So I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead. I didn't want to.
No. But I want you to comment on both what Jerry was saying about both. I mean, this is the thing that got me yesterday, and then again this morning when I was reminded of it. By the way, folks, when Tony's talking about Steven Seagal, he's not joking. I mean, Ukraine.
Well, he's joking, but he's not joking. We get it.
No, Jerry, look at this. Hold on for a second. Let me share this screen. In 2017, Ukraine banned Steven Seagal as a threat to national security. So I mean, listen. I mean, this is art imitating life, imitating art.
Let me ask you. But hold on, Tony, where were you born, Tony? Where are you from?
I was born actually in Kansas City, Missouri. So I was right in the middle of America.
Because you have a little bit of a New York sense of humor, which I appreciate.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
It's the Army, Jerry.
I spent time in the Philippines when I was a kid. My dad was a maintenance officer who was on the F-4s flying into Vietnam, and then I actually went to high school in Lisbon, Portugal. At an American school, American International School. Wow. Look, Frank Carlucci, Ambassador Carlucci's son and I were in class together, got drunk a lot. I was bartending for the Marine. No, I was bartending for the Marine Guard at 14 at the Marine House there. So look, trust me, I had a very jaded upbringing. Just
varied, very varied.
There you go.
I'm no Boy Scout.
Yes. But let's go back to this though, because Jerry asked the question. I was shocked yesterday and this morning, as we're talking about these sanctions, that the White House, the United States, was not calling for a ban, a sanction on Russian energy imports. I'm sorry, Russian energy exports and Russian energy money transfers. At the same time, I shouldn't be surprised because we're not doing anything to bolster our energy independence once again. Right. Talk a little bit about this.
So, yeah, to Jerry's point, and I think the SWIFT banking system and the energy issue are linked completely. Yeah. And this is why. So one of the things that Putin took full advantage of is when Joe Biden reduced our ability to produce and removed us from being a net exporter and jacking up the price, guess who benefited? Putin. Putin, right. From 100%. People I talked to, Putin was able to amass with the other oligarchs about 2 years of that capital available to them over the past year because of all the oil sales. Like, we jack up the price, they benefit. This is not rocket science. And then you compound that with the fact that during the same time, Putin is trying to seduce, and successfully so, the Germans into being his co-conspirator. They're the big distribution center of all this energy coming into Europe. So you've neutralized Germany. You've essentially allowed to take advantage of one of your a political moron, if you will. You've taken advantage of this guy because Biden's agenda is to constrict U.S. Energy markets to push people to this green energy thing. Right. We should talk. The green energy thing is complete fiction. I've got a degree in environmental studies. Gentlemen, it's a complete
We just
fiction.
said this. Before you came on, we were just saying that this idea of green energy is a myth. It doesn't exist,
insane.
which is why, right, Tony, this is why Germany, right, and Western Europe went toward green energy, realized there was none, and now they had to come back and are dependent upon Russian energy.
Let me hit this point. We should have a show on this separately. There are renewable resources out there, but they're not going after them. The greatest renewable resource and least fatal to human life is actually nuclear. If you look
Absolutely,
at the stats,
100%.
Yes.
that's why the French have gone to it. You know, let me do a Joe Biden. That's why the French have gone to it because they recognize this.
Yeah.
So then the other area is hydro. We've known hydro for a long time. It's not as good as nuclear, but it's pretty good. And then we need to get to the point of where there's actually a great deal of research being done on oh my God, I always forget this. The stuff that runs the sun on
Solar.
No, not solar.
Oh,
solar.
hydrogen power. Hydrogen power. Yeah.
Boy, once we break that code, you're going to have but they keep telling you, oh no, we need to go to all these other. It's like it's a fiction. It's meant to constrict and control any means of production. Anyway, back to it, and that's what Biden's doing. So Putin, not being a fool, sees this like, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. And I've got information saying that the Russians, being the Russians, are helping fund some of the green movements who are working against us in their own country.
Didn't I just tell you this? Actually, this is a perfect segue, Tony, into the other point that I made, which is that Tuesday night was, to me, the culmination. It was the zenith. There's my dog barking. Was the zenith of Vladimir Putin's 40 plus years career in undoing the fabric of Western classical liberal society. All of his counterintelligence operations, all of his infiltration operations, turning Western establishments against one another, turning people in America against one another, turning nations in Europe against one another. Tuesday was the culmination of that. Talk a little bit about this and talk about what you're just saying about the funding by. Actually, before you get to this, because this is the other point that I made to Jerry, right, is that Jerry and I have a saying, which is your opponent, you know what your opponent is doing by what they accuse you of. Right. And so Putin's belief that you can't have spontaneous protest, you can't have organic protest, it is founded in this idea that he's been supporting protests for years. Go ahead.
So, yeah, and I want to circle back eventually to the issue regarding the
energy.
the SWIFT and energy.
SWIFT, yeah, of course.
Yeah. But
start there
let me
if you
go
want.
back because this is all related to it. So Putin is a KGB guy. I keep telling you this. He's a true thug. He has murdered personally. This is him with his own hands murdered a female journalist in an elevator in Moscow. This guy is not a good guy, and he embodies every single aspect of what you would think of a Bond villain or a KGB officer, which are interchangeable in many ways. So he has learned over the years, and I would argue very well, the art of deception, the art of camouflage, and the art of projection. These are all things that he came up through the Soviet system learning very well. And he's even commented the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the fall of the Soviet Union. He's not even hiding any of this. So I've argued, and others have argued, that you need to accept him at face value. Don't trust what he says, but accept the fact that he's going to say things to provoke and change the fabric of what's going on. What he feels that he needs to do is two things, in my judgment, based on his experience. Through all of these things we just talked about, all these tools, techniques, and experience he has, he will do things to both empower the Russian empire that he wants to reconstruct and deconstruct the West. And that's what he's trying to do. Both are related and being executed at the same time. So it's so funny when the Democrats back in 2016, 2017 saying, oh, Putin's trying to pick someone. No, he's just trying to undermine democracy. Right. He does this in all the countries.
Yes.
He's out to disrupt and disable. That's what he's trying to do. And by the way, this is where he and Z have a common interest because they want to destabilize us and our Western democracies for purposes of dominance. Now, eventually, just like if you ever saw the series Man in the High Castle, if they win, the empires are going to go with each other eventually. But for now, they're the best of friends. And that's why I would argue that Putin is more than happy to play the China card back on us. Remember, Nixon played the China card against the old Soviets. Now he's playing it back on us. And so I think that's what's at play here is that Putin is using his massive experience And to your point, he's the guy in charge now. He can set the tone, and he is. And by the way, a couple days ago, you saw where he publicly eviscerated his intelligence chief. That was done. That was meant to send messages.
Sure.
One of the things the Russians did during the Cold War is they watched every nuance of Reagan, and they were right to do that, by the way, because my friend Bud McFarland, was National Security Advisor to President Reagan, told me that Reagan was doing the same thing. He said Reagan would say, "Bud, I want a profile on X. I'm going to be meeting with that man." And so Reagan always studied the man, not the system. He could care less about the system. He played Gorbachev. He played these guys. He was actually trying to focus on how to go after that individual. Putin learned from that. Putin plays the man and reads the room. Biden can't read the room. I don't know if he can read what's put in front of him any given day. So Putin has been a great student of history, a great student of tactics, and all of it's coming together now in a very concise, and like nobody's going to stand up to him at this point. He read the room correctly. Yep. He played the cards correctly. And I'm not saying this because I like Putin. I'm just saying you got to admire the man for having played the game so well.
And this is hold on, Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry, because it's your turn.
Well, because Tony just laid out perfectly what I was going to ask, and that is what is Putin's end game, and we get that. What's Biden's end game?
So, I think Biden is simply an extension of the Obama regime. I don't believe he has much in the way of original thoughts. As a matter of fact, I think much of what they've pushed him to do goes against what he and Scranton Joe would have done. I think Klan being the chief of staff is the conduit of Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett is getting, so I think it's more about Obama third term rather than what Joe wants to do. What he's doing is trying to essentially establish a path towards Build Back Better. I do believe that. London Center, we produced a number of things on this whole thing that is being pushed by the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. Yep. Little note: never support an agenda where a German wants to reorder the entire socialist.
One would think you would know that. Yeah.
Just saying, it didn't work last time.
We have fathers saying goodbye to their daughters at train stations in Kiev.
Yes.
And we have our president is working to bring us Build Back Better.
Yes. So that point, let's put let's two together. So Ukraine is the unfortunate victim, down to the individual level, Jerry, you just mentioned, of this East-West power struggle. Remember, and I did an editorial on this a few weeks ago in the Washington Times. I think we talked about it a while back. I laid out all the different things that have happened, all the different agreements, and how nobody ever followed through. Jerry, the blunt truth is, if we wanted Ukraine to be in NATO, they'd be in NATO right now. This was a political decision where the West, multiple administrations dangled Ukraine. Well, Ukraine, maybe you can do this. A guy named Hunter Biden enriched himself over this triangulation. They were, the Ukrainians are trying to buy their own security via these politicians. Now, don't trust Democrat politicians, just saying. Don't. But they did. And at the same time, you had this growing, and I would argue, very observable pressure from Putin. Putin saying, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to stand for this. And doing things to show that. And yet everybody kind of pretending they didn't see it. So both sides are wrong on this. Putin's Putin. It's like Putin's going to be the thug, accept that. But instead of understanding he's going to act, because somehow we missed Georgia. You didn't get Georgia. You didn't get Crimea. How are you missing this? Joe Biden, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Biden, said during his confirmation hearings, when he was asked, what is the greatest threat to global security? And he said, Russia. Everybody thought he was nuts. And I actually, it's like, no, he got it. Putin is motivated and funded to do things. China has aspirations, don't get me wrong, but they're not in the position to do the dominance like Putin's trying to do. Putin has a plan, he has the means, and he has the funding. So this is where we have allowed this Ukraine to be the victim of both sides. And that was a conscious decision by all political parties involved. And I feel sorry for the people of Ukraine. I don't know Ukrainians that well, but I feel terrible about the pain and suffering they are now being forced to endure because of East-West political dominant games that they're in the middle of.
Tony, it's interesting because I mean, I go back to the real problem was Ukraine made this agreement in 1994. They gave up the former Soviet nuclear weapons under the guarantee that their sovereignty would be protected by the West.
And Andrew, remember this, they were disarmed in 2006, 2007, led by Senator Barack Obama, where there was this effort to get rid of their arms. And
remember, and on that point, before we move on, remember that in that accord, they did not have any enforcement mechanisms. And another hint here, another big hint: never accept an accord without enforcement mechanisms.
Yes. But my point is this: once Putin invaded, sovereign Ukrainian territory, and that was not challenged back in 2014. Once Ukraine no longer had its historic territorial borders in place, they couldn't. There was no way for them to join NATO, was there? I mean, that was. So go ahead.
That's a great question, because that's one of the things he said. Oh, well, there's certain standards that have to be met. You can't have territorial disputes. Nonsense. Look, if someone was actually going, this is where we need a Schwarzkopf in charge of UCOM, a general who understood strategy and understood long-term effects of strategic failure. Could or should have said, and I'm not the guy in charge. I advise a lot of folks who are in charge. I would have said, look, you need to do X. You need to do X, Y, and Z, and be done with it. So that's what I think they didn't do, is that you didn't set up a good strategic framework to understand more clearly what the consequences of this dangling participle known as Ukraine would be. They could have done it at any time. We could have convinced all the other NATO members it's in your interest to do that, but they didn't do that. So it was a political equation to get. So
do we have an obligation? This gets, so it's funny because Vindman was on. Now, last time you were on, I talked about my 2014 piece about putting troops on the ground in Kiev as a way of being a nuclear control rod to sort of say, okay, this is a line you can't cross. I came in for some flack for that. You never want to commit U.S. troops unless you're really willing to put them in harm's way.
Right.
But basing it on the language of that 1994 agreement, Alexander Vindman was on MSNBC this morning. I don't have the clip up here. So Vindman was on this morning saying essentially the same thing. And there was a question as to whether or not they should be American forces or NATO forces, whether or not they should have been in Western Ukraine. But where do you come down on what were our obligations under that 1994 agreement, and what are your thoughts on troops on the ground?
I the beholder, because as I said, Andrew, there's no enforcement mechanisms to the Budapest Accord.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about a bad deal. I mean, who gives up nuclear weapons for a promise of maybe? I mean, really, that's what they did. It's like, give up all the nukes and we'll take care of you. Just trust us.
This is the line from Animal House. Yeah.
The interesting thing here, though, is, and again, so that's Bill Clinton. Then you have George W. Bush, and you have 2008 Georgia. Then you have 2014 Crimea with Obama, and then you had a four-year interval where there was no push from Putin. And again, this is political. I'm going to be political, and I'm going to go on my show on Sunday. I have put out a request to any Never Trumper to come on my show on Sunday and defend. And I've tweeted out, Andrew. I've tweeted out to Williamson and to David French and to Michael Steele and all the rest of these guys. Come on my show.
They all blocked me because
but the point is this. The Never Trumpers are still talking about Trump and Putin, and yet no one's talking about how the fact is Trump kept put the Germans on notice.
Jerry, Trump basically, because he opened up the spigots, allowed us to become a net exporter and dropped the price of oil, defunded Putin.
Yes.
And then the other thing he did was he maintained and even enhanced sanctions against Putin in areas which actually made the difference. The SWIFT system is a good example where, okay, we're going to do all this. Oh, no, SWIFT, no. That's going to be actually causing everybody pain. Well, maybe it's time, if you're serious about your policy, you cause everybody pain. But they're not willing to do that.
How about we cause everybody pain in the same way that Americans are going to feel more pain, over
Exactly.
this. But
wait
Tony,
a second. No, I think Thomas Jefferson has been fundamentally misunderstood when he talked about the tree of liberty being sprinkled with the blood of patriots. That's this. That's right now. We should feel pain right now. Let's pay $6 at the pump for gas if it means pushing back the Russians in Ukraine.
Yeah. But
something I asked Andrew earlier, and that is, we have to make a stand somewhere. The West has to make a stand somewhere. Is it the Balkans? Is it Poland?
Jerry, you mean the Baltics? I'm sorry.
The Baltics. What did I say?
Baltics. Yeah,
you said the Balkans. I'm thinking World War I. I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right.
The Balkanization of Jerry's speech.
Yes. Sure.
But yes, I mean, is it Poland? Is it? Where is it? Where do we make our stand? Or we don't?
Sorry about that, guys. No, I got another thing I got to get to. I've forgotten something I have to do at 10. I got to jump off here, guys. But
no worries. We'll have you back.
We will have you back.
I think we covered. I think we hit everything we wanted to hit. But Chris, I love Chris. Something else he lined up for me.
Go do your thing.
But no, gentlemen, I love our discussion. This is great because I want to really get information out for people to understand what this is all linked, and yet somehow the big pieces we've ignored.
Tony, wait, before we let you go, yes or no, does this stop with Ukraine or does Putin push into the NATO nations?
No, it stops for Ukraine now. I mean, he's going to probably consolidate over the next 10 days. He's going to announce an end of combat operations. It stops for now. Come on, look, he did. Georgia backed off. Crimea backed off. He's going to do the same thing here. And plus, he's got to give Z some time in the sun next. So I think that's what's coming in the fall. And by the way, they're not going right away. They're probably going to go in the fall if they go. The Chinese did. So
got it. Thank you, Tony.
Right, thanks, guys.
Take care.
Hey, God bless you, buddy. Thank you.
You too.
Thanks. That's too bad because I know we could have. You and I had a lot more.
Because the thing is, I have a sincere curiosity about where we can't let. Although Andrew, as I'm thinking this through, we've talked about this. I don't think Putin has his eyes on dominating Western Europe.
No, I agree with you. Jerry, so, hold on. Let's at this point, because Tony's gone, let's now go to the bottom line.
The bottom line.
The bottom line.
Okay, you were saying, Jerry. Yeah, Western Europe.
Right.
And so I agree with you, but the question is, right, this is sort of the fundamental issue. Was yesterday's, and this is, I'm sorry Tony's not here, because that's the question I wanted to get to. Then I wanted to get to the question about Russian Orthodoxy and all of that jazz. But again, Jerry, you should be thankful we didn't spend a half hour talking about that. But my point is that to me, yesterday's speech from President Biden was to me a signal to Putin that we're going to tolerate the invasion of Ukraine, right? We cannot oust you from Ukraine. The Ukrainian people might be able to do that. I'm not sure what people are thinking when they think we can funnel weapons into any kind of a resistance. But Biden was saying that we're going to the line is the line that we're drawing is around Ukraine because it's not a member of NATO and there's nothing we can do, and we're going to ignore what we half-baked agreed to in 1994, and that's and I think that's it. So this is why I get to this question of, are the Baltic states really under threat? Is Eastern Poland really under threat? I don't think he goes into Romania. He could theoretically go into Moldova, but anyway, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Well, again, this is where my heart and my mind is, and that is we're governed in America by dishonorable people, and I hearken back to what was happening in Syria and the Middle East during the Obama years, and all the human lives lost, and Obama's fecklessness and his. And this is the thing, the progressives care about their own power. I think it's absolutely true and chilling. When I asked Tony about the bottom line, what is Biden's endpoint? And it's Build Back Better. Yeah. It has nothing to do with stability and peace,
and that's why, Jerry,
around the world.
I don't think it's necessarily fecklessness. I mean, there is the perception of fecklessness
It's
on the world
cowardice.
stage.
Well,
but okay. So it's probably a combination of all of this. There's a degree of
I think most
most
Democrats are cowards.
Well, okay. So there's a degree of, but okay,
they're cowards.
I'm not so sure. I think, to me, it has to do with there is in some measure a belief in a surreal, non-existent view of the world, right? A view of a world of their intention, where they can get along and sort of do things that bear no relationship to very real realities. So there's that aspect of it, and that sort of covers the ineptitude and fecklessness. They think because they wish something to be true, therefore it is true. Then there is the issue of the striving for power and control and autocracy that you and I have talked about. That is frankly something they share with Vladimir Putin. But the idea of controlling people and controlling people's choices, controlling how far they can go, controlling what they can say, controlling where they live, etc. And then, and then you get into and that's part of the quest for power. I think that's bound up in all of this. Is there? I mean, when you talk about cowardice, what is it that you mean?
I don't see how a man can watch another man abandon his family because of a threat of an invasion and not be riled up in your spirit and your soul.
Well, sure.
I said to you earlier today, after watching,
Jerry, I don't think that there is. Are you suggesting? I mean, there is a very small percentage of the world. There's a very small percentage of the United States that is watching what is happening and not crying out for some kind of a response. I don't think. I think there are degrees of responses.
Well, look, I would be satisfied if our president was a serious person. Look, yesterday, Andrew, former Senator John Kerry gave an interview where he talked about that the Ukraine incident will take attention away from climate change.
Yeah, I know. Yes, but I don't consider that cowardice. I consider that stupidity. I don't think that's John Kerry saying that. I don't think it's cowardice so much as it is John Kerry having a single-mindedness towards a phantom issue that gives him a perception of enormous power. I guess, and this callousness and unfeeling. But maybe you and I are looking at this. But
viscerally, this is what I mean. This is like, just go back now to being in high school or grammar school or college even. I had a general rule. If I was out with my buddies and I never provoked and I kept my head down and I would mind my own business. But if someone came over to me and said, "You want to fight?" My answer was always yes. Always yes. Never said no. It was always yes. And 99% of the time, the person who threatened me backed away. Sure. What I'm saying is Joe Biden doesn't have that steel in his spine. Neither does John Kerry. Neither did Obama. Neither does AOC. None of these Democrats who are pushing this radical agenda.
So there is
which is why they're so afraid of Trump.
Talking about cowardice, what you're really talking about is political cowardice. I mean, in the end, what they're doing is they don't want to make a decision that is going to be unpopular.
Yes.
Okay. So I can understand that, but I think that there is a certain degree of that on both sides. I mean, I think you're hard.
Well, absolutely, there is. Of course, there is. And again, this is why Donald Trump scared everybody because he lacked. Maybe it was a lack of self-awareness, but Trump would say things and do things that no one else would do. Look, go back to the tax cuts, right? Any other president would have folded on the Republican tax cuts. He didn't because he didn't care, because he wasn't a coward.
But well, no, okay. I think he didn't care because, again, for him, he could play that. He was not a political coward in that regard, right? You and I have talked about this, whether or not Donald Trump would be the kind of guy who you would walk up to and say something in the schoolyard and he would run away if you punch him back. So I mean, let's but my point is this, we do have to think deeply, and I listen, we could sort of talk about this. And this is why I really wish we'd have more time with Tony on this, because to get into this issue of imminent, and again, I am someone who has written about this I am, and I've talked to people. We've talked about this with regards to Syria and what we were doing in Syria, and whether or not whether or not we should have committed U.S. planes, because all of a sudden we'd have U.S. planes flying against Russian planes, and that's how you turn a proxy war into an actual war. So the question then becomes,
why are we so afraid of war? I mean, our post World War II foreign policy establishment is terrified of war, and what happens is it ends up putting us in extended conflicts where Americans die. Why don't we just
because Jerry, then this is the concept of whether or not, you know, again, sort of dealing with the realities on the ground and the real politics of the situation. So right, this is the whole school of thought behind the concept of modern international relations theory, which is the idea of physical conflict avoidance, and how you want to, because war is the last resort, right? Violence is violence is the last refuge of the incompetent, I think, as the phrase goes. The point is this: because you're talking about being stirred by people dying and wanting to do something, there is the reaction: do we commit our sons and daughters? We've been down this road. And then you add into it the fact that you're talking about nations that have nuclear arms, and someone like Vladimir Putin, who hold on, let me, Jerry, I got to finish my thought. Vladimir Putin, regardless of whether or not you think he is acting because he's got a religious zealotry, or whether or not he's got a zealotry of Russo nationalism, or whether he's acting out of Vladimir Putin's greatest self-interest, the bottom line is, here is a guy who would not be afraid to use nuclear weapons in an exchange,
right?
And so that's that. I'll maybe you can call that. I don't consider it cowardice to be deeply concerned about that.
But taking your train of thought to its logical conclusion, and that is that America can never respond to a despot like Putin. But
see, that's just it. I think there are ways to do it, and I think.
Well, what are they? Because we're not doing them, and we haven't.
But we haven't. For instance, as Tony was talking about,
we never have.
Hold on, no.
We never have.
We were doing it under.
Never.
We were doing it under Donald Trump, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes and no.
Hold on for a second, right?
Yeah.
So if you create an energy independent, like let's just say you create an energy independent United States, and you make the United States the global dominant energy exporting power, and you somehow buy off the Middle East so that they've bought into this. But let's just start with the United States there, and you completely undercut Russia's energy industry to the point where the nation goes bankrupt, the oligarchs go bankrupt around Vladimir Putin, and all of a sudden you cut off Vladimir Putin's support. Right. And then Vladimir Putin does not have the money to.
We've gone through this, and you're right, and you know, every time Russia has been on the war footing has been when energy prices have been high. And yes, during the Trump years, we didn't have a hot war because of our energy policies, because of our NATO policy, because of his pressure on Germany and his sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Nord Stream 2, and also remember this: Russia in Syria. Trump had killed Russian troops. I get all that. I think the point I'm trying to make, and maybe I'm being too obtuse, is that since World War II, you look at all the conflicts that we have been engaged, and it has just caused more death because America has refused to fight. Look again, just for our
Jerry,
listeners.
I think you're proceeding from a false equivalency here, which is the idea that you know, doing something that is protracted but doesn't instill the nuclear option, and I mean the literal nuclear option, is somehow more costly than if we engage in the conflict in which the nuclear option was
by your thinking, we could never stand up. Again, in the real world, we're not energy independent. In the real world, we have a fetish for climate change. In the real world, we're not going to do sanctions. We're not going to kick them out of the SWIFT banking system. So that means eventually we're going to have to fight them. And the problem with what you're saying is that because we're afraid he might use tactical nuclear weapons, right, in the field of battle, then we can't,
non-tactical nuclear weapons
or whatever,
nuclear weapons that go beyond there. Yeah.
So therefore, we can't fight them. This is what it comes.
No. See, Jerry, I don't think that's true. I think we have to be damn certain when we go out and we decide to engage. This is why this question.
Damn certain of what, though? Certain of what?
Damn certain that if we engage in a ground conflict, that the Putin's ability to use nuclear weapons either in a tactical or mass situation is going to be neutralized before he can do it.
But you can't do that, Andrew. What you just laid out can't be done.
But this is my point in the end, is that this is why this question of whether or not this is going to spill out beyond Ukraine is going to happen, and then what is our response going to be in terms of making it personally painful for Vladimir Putin and for the Russians. Listen, here's the reality, right? Number one, nobody expected that the Ukrainian people will be able to fight back in the last couple of days in the way that they have been. That's surprised everybody, and that's where the 13 Ukrainian border guards who were killed. That's why that story is so important. At the same time, I don't think the Russian government was prepared for very vocal response inside its own borders.
But look, the people of Ukraine are begging us for help, and we're not doing it. And what I mean, Andrew, it's wrong. What's happening is just wrong. It's just wrong. But there are people dying there, and again, we have a moral obligation because we're the ones who facilitated it.
As I said, Jerry,
we did this.
Listen, I'm the person who wrote in 2014 that we should have committed troops on the ground then in 2014. All I am saying is that and as a number of people some of whom I have more respect for and some people that I have less respect for pointed out to me, you have to be really cautious and careful when you're committing to put U.S. troops in harm's way.
Well, you're saying things that are like the straw man argument. No, we shouldn't be cautious. We should just do it. Who's arguing that?
No, but
that's Jerry, the problem. The problem is everyone wants to be cautious.
You're arguing that we should just go ahead and do this. We should just go ahead and put U.S. troops on the ground.
Hey, what if China decides? Look, what we did in Afghanistan, leaving our allies there to be raped and to be murdered is beyond shameful, and it happened. And Biden's not being held accountable for it.
And ironically, the Afghan. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at this. The Afghan government turned around and condemned Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which is insane. But go ahead.
But and again,
the Taliban government.
And a lot of the history here is wrong. The fact of the matter is, the Afghani army bled for years alongside Americans.
Sure.
And in fact, toward the end of the Afghani conflict, it was the Afghani army. Listen, I think they had 200,000 casualties at one point over time. Jerry, and we abandoned them.
And this gets into the entire breadth of the history of conflict in Afghanistan going back to 1979, right? That's not the entire history, but the history of conflict in Afghanistan going back to 1979. And U.S. callousness for the first half of the 1980s, in which our strategy was to allow the Afghan people to essentially walk into machine gun fire in the hopes of bleeding the Russians to death. We wound up finding a way to funnel weapons into Afghanistan so that the Afghan people could fight the Russians, drive them out of Afghanistan. And then what do? We abandoned them, and 10 years later, we were dealing with the Taliban.
Just because it's an important discussion.
Yeah.
No one is saying that we put troops in harm's way in a casual way. What I'm saying is that you look at World War II, it was total war, go get victory, unconditional surrender, and then it was a Pax Americana. We wrote the peace, we wrote the Constitution for Japan, and then we moved forward. And then we had the Marshall Plan and American dominance in Asia and in Western Europe. The problem is that then we dug into this Cold War mentality where we had Korea, that we for 3 years, 56,000 Americans dead for what? Because we were afraid that we were fighting the Chinese anyway. So we were cautious to a point of 56,000 dead Americans, and then Vietnam.
Yes.
I mean, Vietnam,
Okay,
58,000 dead
so Jerry,
Americans.
but this is the point then, right? Which is, okay, so we're going to commit these troops, NATO troops, American troops, to a protracted conventional war in Europe. So
why does it have to be protracted? Go win. Go win.
Okay,
it's like a football game. Okay, go win.
Because von Clausewitz talks about the fog of war, and that in war things are unpredictable, and the Russians are seeing it right now. Listen, the Russians are seeing it right now on the ground in Ukraine, where they thought that they could.
Why have NATO? Why have NATO?
No, Jerry. Here's my point is we're talking about this, and again, this is a good conversation to have. But the expectation was that that Russia could do what they did in Afghanistan. They could drop troops in, seize airfields, come in on a 3-access front, and move in and take Ukraine. And this wouldn't be a problem. But here they are with hundreds of casualties now, just in the first couple of days, and the Ukrainian people fighting back in ways that the Russians didn't expect. And so the question then becomes, right, you can say we don't want a protracted war on the ground in Eastern Europe, but there's no predicting whether or not that war is going to be simple, straightforward, or protracted.
I understand what you're saying, but you take what you're saying to its end, and you would never commit troops because you'd never know what might happen. And what I'm saying is that is not a way to bring stability and peace to our foreign policy or security at home here in America.
Jerry, it's in the end, and maybe it's because I was a military spouse, and I am supremely sensitive to the instances in which we commit U.S. troops.
Well, but Andrew, but again, if you're sensitive to that, how many Americans died in Afghanistan over 20 years? Yes. Why? Because we would not just go and do away with our enemies.
No. But that's
was a self-inflicted,
protracted time out for a second.
Conflict.
That's not
yes.
That's not necessarily true, Jerry.
Show me how it wasn't.
Time out for a second, because in the end, Jerry, a battle is fought on the ground. And the battle conditions change depending on the ground upon which you're fighting. It's classic Sun Tzu art of war. You try to pick your own battlefields. But the problem becomes when you're fighting in a place like Afghanistan, which has for centuries been known as the graveyard of empires, because so many different kinds of people have tried to fight wars in Afghanistan, and they have all failed over time because it's so difficult. This is why the Balkan conflicts, the conflicts in what were the former Yugoslavia republics, took so long and bled so many people. It's not a question of putting so many troops on the ground that you simply overwhelm your enemy, because there are so many other factors that can get involved.
And again, what what proves your point wrong is World War II. Is because if you look, we never had more than 150,000 troops in Afghanistan. We could have overwhelmed Afghanistan with American power. We could have driven the Taliban. I will point out that the war in Europe, even after, so the war in Europe had been raging for years before American boots were on the ground, and even after American boots were on the ground, starting in Africa, and then moving into Sicily and into mainland Italy, and then finally the D-Day invasion, it took a very long time, and there were huge amounts of American deaths and casualties as a result of this. It was half the time that we were in Afghanistan. Actually, Andrew, no, it didn't. We fought World War II over a 4-year period. That's remarkably short, given that it was a world war. I mean, it was 4 years. We went in, yes, and we put the full weight of the American power behind our armed forces. Unconditional surrender was our goal.
But Jerry, we had a total national effort.
Yes,
and America was existentially threatened.
We just had
during
this.
World War II.
Look, I think there's an existential threat right now. If Russia goes and takes Ukraine, and then they go into Eastern Poland, and then America decides decides that, well, we can't go, we can't fight
Well,
the Russians.
no. Listen, if first of all, if Putin goes into Poland, then we are obligated under NATO and NATO.
Oh, but what about tactical nuclear weapons, Andrew? He might use them.
Jerry,
oh my goodness, we can't defend Poland.
No,
he might use nuclear weapons.
But again, right, Jerry, this gets into the actual red lines that are crossed here. But my point is, and then that does become an
I don't understand how are there red lines? Because in your thinking, as long as he might threaten tactical, yes, massive nuclear bomb, but forget that. He could just use a tactical nuclear weapons. Why defend Poland if he's going to use tactical nuclear weapons?
Jerry, again, it gets down into the treaty obligations that we have. We will have no other choice. We will have no the choices will have been completely. So
my next question then is that what if we decide, fuck it, we don't care what the treaty says. My point is that Russia is an existential threat. That's my point. Because we don't know. You think Joe Biden, seriously, you think this group of characters, if he wins in 2024, you think this group of characters, you think they're going to send 250,000 troops to Poland?
Yeah, I think, yes. I think that if it came down to it, if NATO itself was violated, the boundaries of NATO were violated, the United States would commit troops. Absolutely. Which is why we're committing troops to Eastern Europe right now. Right? That's why we're going down.
It's ridiculous. We're moving. I read the numbers. We're sending 500 troops to Germany. We're sending 7,000 troops to Poland. It's laughable. If you want,
but Jerry, again,
it's laughable.
Jerry, okay, but you are missing the greater point as to how deployments work.
No, I'm not. No,
because in the end you're saying, okay, so now we're gonna right now we don't know how long this is going to take. We don't know what Putin is going to do in terms of Ukraine itself. So now we're going to commit 500,000 American troops to Europe immediately.
What I said was we should move 100,000 troops into the
100,000 troop mobilization to Europe now represents a massive commitment of U.S. resources.
Yes,
in a way where we're okay. So now we are completely disrupting U.S. national security issues here at home. We have other fish that we need to fry. We don't know what's going to happen.
Andrew.
Hold on. We don't know what's going to happen with Iran down to the Straits of Hormuz. We don't know what's going to happen with Taiwan and Xi Jinping.
Andrew.
So all of a sudden now we have.
I was talking to Jim Carafano last night.
Yeah, and
he said that at the end of the day, if the Russians win and take Ukraine, they'll have upwards to 250,000 troops in Ukraine. The 150,000 plus the other 60 from Belarus, plus the reinforcements coming in, about 250,000 troops. And then if they wanted to move on Poland, what are we going to do? We can't do anything about it. So you're saying, so what you're saying is we should pull a Biden. Let's wait until after they invade, and what was
Jerry.
Yes,
hold on, Jerry. Right now, hold on. I'm going to pull up American troop strengths in Germany. I know you just talked about this. American troop strength. Now we don't have nearly as many as we did before.
While you're doing that, let me just say this: if they have 250,000 troops in Ukraine, they could take away the forward landing bases that we once maintained in Western Europe. And then America would somehow would need to get our troops across the ocean. It would be impossible. So my point is, if we're serious about defending NATO, you don't wait until NATO is invaded.
First of all, you have to remember that NATO is not just the United States, and we can't go it alone. But right now we have about 100,000 troops.
We have to go it alone. We have to.
But that's not what NATO. That's not what NATO is. NATO is then there's no point to NATO.
Yes, but no. Wait. NATO needs to look. Trump was right.
Okay.
Germany's government is anti-American. We know this.
Yes, and they're
the Turkish government.
Yes,
the Turkish government is anti-American. So you have the richest country in Europe and one of the strongest armies in Europe. Both are anti-American. So my point is, if we're going to defend our allies in Poland's our ally. regardless of NATO. We can't wait until after Putin decides to go in.
But Jerry, the reality is to move 100,000 more troops to Europe is a hugely costly exercise, and I think it detracts from operational readiness overall. Now we could listen. It could wind up happening, and Biden could wind up doing this. They could wind up deploying more troops as a result of this. But you take away your operational readiness when you have troops away from their home bases for extended periods of time.
I understand, but here's the thing, right? We really disrupted our operational readiness when we decided to go of an armed forces that could fight on two fronts to one front. And that's what Obama did.
Sure, of course.
And so what needs to be done now is we need a massive reinvestment into our military apparatus, and we need to send troops to Poland immediately. That's what we need to do.
You want more than, and I understand that you want more than 500. I understand this.
I mean, again, this is what bothers me about even about me and you and our podcast and me on the radio and watching these people on CNN and Fox News is we all talk and talk and talk and talk. But the bottom line is there are real lives at stake. And all our talking
and Jerry, and that's what I'm saying. I'm sorry, and all of our talking. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, and the thing is that we know what we need to do. There's going to be about 250,000 troops on the border with Poland shortly. And if the only thing that would stop Putin, look, Putin is smart. We've established that. If there are American troops, because in a conventional war, we would beat the Russians, even if he used tactical nuclear weapons in the field. You have to be willing to accept these risks. Otherwise, you might as well just bend over, Andrew, and ask him to be gentle.
Right. As I said,
please use lubricant. Please use lubricant.
That's just it. I mean, and maybe it was wrong of me to say you're being cavalier about this, but I get very cautious about committing American lives in this situation. And as you know,
and again, what has that cautiousness? What has that reaped? It's reaped Ukraine, people dying. It's NATO's in jeopardy. Again, being cautious. Yesterday, the Chinese flew military aircraft over Taiwan.
But the Chinese, but that's just it, Jerry. I mean, and this is part of the point here. China is a legitimate threat. China, I can pull up the map again, showing the various.
We don't
Chinese
have an obligation to defend Taiwan.
No, and we don't, but we do have an obligation to defend NATO nations. Right. And then there is this question, as I've said, as to what our obligation is to defend Ukraine. That is the central issue. As I said, Jerry, I am pushing back because I think we have to be damn certain about these things. Listen, because we're running short on time here.
But my point is you can't be certain. And if you're waiting for certain, then we're paralyzed.
But I understand this, Jerry. But you're operating under a presumption of certainty about American dominance, and that it will be less costly in American lives if sooner rather than later. And that's I think
what I'm saying is if we don't commit troops sooner, we won't be able to commit them later. That's just
I don't think that's necessarily accurate.
How would we move troops into Poland after 150,000 Russian troops invade Poland? How? Unless we're already there.
No, you don't move them. Well, first of all, you look at what's happening on the ground and you get a sense as to whether or not Putin is really making a move on NATO, and then you start moving the troops to Europe at that point in time. I think we are a long way away. We are a long way away from a point at which Putin is going to turn and go outside. Tony Shaffer just said the same thing. That's what our guest was just saying, that Putin is not going to make a move on NATO until he is fully consolidated, if he were to make a move on NATO. And I think Tony said that he wasn't going to make a move on NATO. But if Putin were going to make a move on NATO, he would not do so until he has consolidated his power in Ukraine. And we are quite a way away from that. And the reality is, Jerry, I think if Putin were going to move against anything, he would move against the Baltic states first, Most notably, I believe it's Estonia. I got to pull the map up.
And they're members of NATO.
They are. Yes, I understand this. Oh shoot, the map doesn't have it. But there is a point north of here where I want to say it's Estonia is bordered on both sides. It may be Latvia is bordered on both sides by Russia. And in that case, right, if he's going to move, he would move against the Baltic states first. But if we saw that happening, we would be positioning troops and military personnel up in Sweden.
But you see, what General Jack Keane has been on a lot the last couple of 3 days.
Yeah,
and they war gamed out protecting Latvia and those in that area. And they said that the Russians would take those countries within 60 hours.
Yes, that's
so therefore, like you said, like you mentioned, you fight your enemy where you choose. Yes. And so therefore, what I'm saying is that Poland is the place, and that's why we should put an overwhelming.
So then, Jerry, what you're saying is, let me pull up the map here. Hold on. Yeah, that works.
I'm just saying that I'm being realistic.
No, I understand this, Jerry. So what you're saying is then the trigger point is, and so here we go. So here is Russia, Belarus, Ukraine,
right?
Though that's now Russia, Moldova, etc. That here on the other side of Belarus,
Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Yeah.
Lithuania. So what you're saying is then if Putin were to move against the Baltic states, that's when we will commit putting troops in Poland.
No. What I'm saying is that unfortunately we've played this out and we are unable to defend those states. And so unfortunately but the thing is, you can't wait until they're in to build it. Look, this is basic. This is like your dad telling you how to fight when you're a kid. You don't wait for the other guy to punch you. You punch first.
All right,
you punch hard.
But Jerry, that goes against, and I understand this. I understand the world has changed, but this goes against the core principle of American military involvement on the world stage. America does not hit first. Well, yes and no, right? I mean, we hit first plenty during World War II.
We didn't wait. I mean, yes,
but Jerry,
Germany never attacked us.
No,
Germany never did.
No, I understand this. Germany never attacked us, but we hit Germany once because we were in an alliance with people who were being hit.
But
we didn't declare war on Germany until Japan hit us.
And also,
Japan was in this Axis alliance with Germany
since 9/11. And I like the W. Bush doctrine of being preemptive. So that's not true. America has not always been not hitting first. We went into Iraq. That was preemptive, right? We thought they had weapons of mass destruction, so we hit them first.
All right, but Jerry, I would argue that our invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a resounding failure.
No, and I would argue back that's revisionist history. And in fact, I remember when Ryan Ellis, a friend of ours, wrote a piece talking about how Iraq was a mistake. And I thought how shameful.
Oh, time out for a second. Jerry, I'm not saying that Iraq was a mistake. I'm saying it was a failure.
Oh, all right, fine.
Yeah.
Well, why was it? It was a failure because we didn't put the full force of the American military might in play. We played politics and we protracted.
Well, we put the full force of American might, and then we lost the end game, and that was a huge problem, right? It was
we didn't because look,
we didn't do.
Look, the Bushies held up, right? You know this. That's why the surge. Right, the surge, and everyone said, "Don't do it, don't do it."
No, but the surge was working.
Why? Yes, because we put the full power of American military back in again.
But then, Jerry, we lost the end game. We fucked up the end game. I'm going to drop the F-bomb.
Right. Sorry. I did already.
Anyway, all right. Listen, I want to shift gears because we've gone on. I think and again, I'm sorry that.
Well, this conversation just depresses me because if this is our attitude, then we might as well just bring Build Back Better back.
All right.
And hold
on. I want to be really clear about this because I think you and I are are more on the same page than we're not on the same page. And I think you're coming away from this more depressed than you need to be.
I hope so.
I mean, and folks, I'm going to say this. Jerry has been, I mean, we talked about Eeyorish Jerry last week. Jerry has been in a mood for several days now. And there are a lot of reasons for this. He's angry at everybody. Right? Am I wrong, Jerry? You're not angry at everybody?
I mean, again, the shamefulness, the dishonor, the president of the United States, that speech he gave yesterday. And the fact of the matter is we ought to be stopping all energy exports from Russia, and we're not doing it.
Yeah, agreed. And we need to be, and you know something, I'm going to drop the F-bomb again. I said this to my daughter yesterday. I said, the bottom line is the Biden administration needs to tell the environmental movement to go fuck themselves in the same way that they need to take a page from the heroes of Snake Island.
The 13 men.
Yeah, the 13 men on Snake Island. But I think, Jerry, you and I both agree that a strong military response needs to happen. I am just more cautious than you are. I think that's the main difference here. I just and you and I come at this from two different sensitivities here, and that's fine. Listen, I want to turn our attention to something completely unrelated to all this, real quick, while we have everybody here. You've been following, you and I have talked about this guy Bill Penzi from Penzi's Spices, the guy who told all of his customers that if you were a Republican, he didn't want your business.
I remember, yes.
And in honor of Martin Luther King Day, he said we're having a Republicans are racist sale.
Oh my goodness!
So this ad popped up in my Facebook feed from this company, and it popped up several times in my Facebook feed, in which the company is essentially they are decrying their critics and telling people you have to choose sides, and you can either be on our side, which is the side of lightness and good, or you're on the other side, which is the side of the racists. And I did a little digging, and it turns out that at least according to one reporter, Penzi's is in major financial trouble as a result of this guy. So I dropped this guy an email yesterday.
The Penzi guy?
Yeah.
All right. This I like. I
dropped him an email. I said, hey, you might think maybe as you are decrying the fact that you have these critics and these critics are hurting your bottom line, that maybe, just maybe, you are courting this kind of dissent. And he wrote back, Jerry, and it must have been a block screed. He wrote back what I thought was a form letter, sort of accusing Republicans of racism and saying you have to be intolerant to those people who are intolerant. So I wrote him back, and we went back and forth, literally went back and forth a couple of different times. And he starts bringing up the two pieces of election reform legislation that failed this year.
Yes. And
saying that Republican opposition to it was racist. And again, he got very angry with me. And in the next to last email that I sent him, I said, you are guilty of the bigotry. For all of your bluster, you are guilty of the bigotry of low expectations. You don't believe that people who are differently colored than you can do these things for themselves. So he wrote back to me something about this mytho-history that people of color are traditionally unable to get to the polls. They don't have cars, so they need a day off. And in my final email to him, I wrote, hey, not for nothing, Mr. Penzi, but do you shut down your operations on election day? Do you give all of your people in your corporate headquarters and your retail stores and your warehouses, do you give them the day off on election day to vote? And I never heard back from him. Yeah. So there you go. My little story. Go ahead.
Well, I like it that he responded. And again, that's it's funny. There are these hot pockets in our political discussion that just worry me. And you're right. Yeah. I get depressed is the wrong word. Angry. But I get at the dishonor of it, at the untruthfulness of it. And one of those areas has been this, equity politics, and this, again, fetish on race, and how the left uses race as a way to divide us, and all the rest of it. And I just don't see how we recover from that. I think, we have been teaching young people that America is a racist place, that we're founded on racist principles. I saw something the other day, again, out of a curricula of CRT, critical race theory, that talked about the idea of freedom, the notion of freedom, that you have rights. Is evidence of racism.
Listen, it gets back into a conversation I had years ago, work that was being done surveying the Tea Party movement, and a tool of political scientists called the Racial Resentment Index.
Yes, Jerry. I remember you talking about this.
And essentially, for those of you who are uninitiated, the Racial Resentment Index essentially ascribes any interest or support in the tenets of conservatism, self-governance, individual rights, the idea of working hard and achieving through your own effort, the meritocracy. Those things are evidence. If you talk about those things, that is evidence of racial resentment. And the more you talk about them, the higher on the Racial Resentment Index you are. So therefore, under this construct, all of the things that the Tea Party movement believed in were racist. Jerry, what before we go, Picard returns next week. Are you excited?
I saw that on Paramount TV. They're coming back. I'm so happy that Star Trek is still going strong.
But they're coming back with another regular Star Trek movie, the new
with Chris Pine. With Chris Pine.
Apparently, Chris Pine was surprised to learn this.
Look, I think I think that reboot with those characters. Unfortunately, the young actor who played Chekhov, he tragically died. Yeah, he died. But what a great reboot! I know there's criticism of the movies and the plot lines, and also I like there's this idea that the original series much more serious in terms of drama, in terms of storytelling. But I'm just so happy. Yeah, I'm happy about it.
Listen, loved the portrayals, loved the actors who were doing the portrayals. Did not like the idea of Vulcan being destroyed. That bothered me.
Yeah, me too. But again, the way this works, they might go back in time and reboot it.
That's what I'm saying is get it back to the original timeline. And I'm still holding out that it would be Quentin Tarantino's final movie would be a Quentin Tarantino directed Star Trek.
I think his final movie. He's young. He's still a young guy.
Oh no! Quentin Tarantino has said that his 10th movie will be his final movie. Oh, let me tell you. I don't believe that at all. I'm going to recommend another podcast to all of you. The Quentin Tarantino interview with Conan O'Brien on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend is well worth listening to.
I like Conan O'Brien a lot,
especially if you are a fan of 1970s TV. It's good stuff. Jerry, you've got a couple of fill-in shifts coming up, I think. And you're showing something.
Here's so I was in yesterday and day before. I'll be on my show on Sunday, WBAL 7 a.m. in the morning. And then I'm on Tuesday from, get this, Andrew.
Oh, yes, of course.
11 p.m. to 2 a.m. offering up reaction to the State of the Union.
Hey, before actually, and as I did the preview, we didn't even talk about this. The other thing you were Eeyorish about today was the president taking time out of his schedule to announce the Supreme Court nominee today.
Yeah, again, I mean, this is just seriousness. I mean, I understand that life goes on and we have to do things, but the president was on his way to Delaware.
Yes,
and his aides had to stop him and say, "Look, the optics are bad. There's a war going on." Do we really need to have a big Rose Garden announcement today in terms of the juxtaposition? Children are dying.
Oh, listen, you want to talk about? Listen, this is not quite as bad as the Applebee's commercial with the guy dancing to country music coming. You saw that, right? Maybe you haven't seen this. So CNN had a major gaffe yesterday as they're showing video of air raid sirens going off in Kiev. They go to commercial, but they still have the shot. Like it's one of those split shots. So they have, and they go to an Applebee's commercial for their breaded spicy chicken fingers, and the guy dancing the boot scoot boogie, and it was very ill timed. See, here's the thing, right? I think that the Biden administration, this gets into the problems with Ron Klain and others. that they should have just waited until the State of the Union to do this, right? If they really wanted to, it was dumb of them to go down this road. Maybe they felt that they couldn't keep it under wraps until Tuesday, which should tell you everything. But
well, the irony is that the Democrats are hoping for a big fight. They're not going to get one.
They're not going to get. They will get zero fight at this point in time.
That's the political miscalculation about today. And so what's going to happen is he'll make the announcement today, and there'll be lots of criticism of him doing this when there's a war happening. And he'll want some kind of visceral reaction from the right, and he's not going to get it.
Yeah.
Look, I think Republicans will vote against this nominee, but for the most part,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The bottom line is that he's the president. We might disagree with this woman's ideology, but the fact is that if she's qualified, then move forward with the nomination.
You don't think he was insistent about doing this? I mean, again, I'm going to put a conspiracy theory on, setting aside the invasion of Ukraine. Do you think that they had timed this announcement to come out during CPAC as a way of sort of blunting what they perceived as the Republican cheerleading at CPAC,
or worse, Andrew, hoping to manufacture a crisis? Look what they said.
Look how
racist. Yeah, look at these racists.
Look how Republicans are reacting at CPAC. Sure, that's the whole thing behind the peppermint patty thing. All right, man. So Tuesday next week we will do a post State of the Union show on Wednesday.
Yes,
I think we have to, even though Jerry will have not gotten to bed until 2.
I'll be ready. Don't worry.
2. So Jerry, where do people need to plant their feet?
Well, I tell you what, before I give you that, I think that there are a lot of people saying pray for Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think we have to pray.
Pray for everybody.
I also think that if you're not right in your faith, get right, because a lot of what's happening because of the darkness and because that people don't have ears to hear and because of the dishonor, I can't help but wonder. Again, this is going to sound crazy. Maybe this is a show for later when we talk about the Russian Orthodox Church. There's a certain kind of spiritual oppression, and I wouldn't be surprised if this really is the end of days, in the sense that if you're a Christian, from if you're a Catholic to a fundamentalist, we all believe that he's coming back. And I mean, you look at what's happening: COVID, Russia, the lies and the dishonor from our politicians. So anyway, so that being said, pray for the people of Ukraine. Pray for President Joe Biden. Pray for him, that he has a change of heart, that he has wisdom, that he does the right thing. Pray for Putin, that there's a miracle, that God intervenes in Putin's life, and so we can stop this. And anyway, find the truth, plant your feet, and stand firm.
Have a great week, everybody.
God bless you.
And stay safe.